Why is healing so confusing? I think one of the weirdest parts of starting a healing journey is realizing how easy it is to swing between two extremes. At first, a lot of us spend years minimizing everything. We go,
No. My childhood was fine. My parents did their best. Other people had it worse. It's not a big deal.
meanwhile, your nervous system is responding to a slightly serious email like you're being hunted for sport. But then, sometimes people start unpacking childhood stuff and swing all the way to the other side. Suddenly, every inconvenience becomes evidence that your parents ruined your life. You're late paying a parking ticket, childhood trauma. You cried in a Target parking lot, generational wounds. You accidentally married someone emotionally unavailable. Well, apparently, that traces back to a family trait established in 1987. And honestly, I get both sides because I've lived both sides. For a long time, I minimized everything. Then I went through a phase where I blamed my parents basically for every unhealthy pattern I had. And I think that phase felt emotionally powerful at first because blame creates clarity. It gives you a villain, a reason, a target. And eventually, I realized something uncomfortable. Blame was helping me explain my pain, but it wasn't helping me heal it. And I think this is where a lot of people get stuck because understanding your childhood is necessary for healing, but building your entire identity around being wounded keeps you emotionally frozen in the same place. One of the hardest parts of healing is learning how to hold two truths at the same time. Your parents may have loved you and still hurt you. They may have sacrificed for you and still passed down unhealthy emotional patterns. They may have genuinely tried their best and still created an environment where you learned anxiety, hyper independence, people pleasing, perfectionism, or even emotional shutdown. And honestly, I think some people resist this nuance because black and white thinking feels emotionally safer. If your parents are entirely good, then maybe your pain doesn't matter. If your parents were entirely bad, then maybe you never have to face your own responsibility for healing. But real healing usually happens somewhere in the uncomfortable middle. I think blame feels powerful because it gives a structure around your pain, especially if you spent years dismissing your own feelings. Once you finally realize,
Oh, wow. My childhood actually did affect me.
there can be this huge emotional release. You start connecting dots everywhere. Why you overwork, why you struggle to rest, why conflict makes you panic, why you feel responsible for everyone. Some anger during this stage is normal. I actually think anger can be healthy sometimes, especially for people who spent their entire lives minimizing themselves. But eventually, something important has to happen. You have to move from this explains me to what do I want to do with this now? Because explanation and healing are not the same thing. And I think a lot of conversations accidentally get those two things confused. There's a lot of content online that basically turns healing into collecting evidence against your parents. And honestly, some of it starts feeling less like healing and more like building a legal case. At some point, you're not trying to move forward anymore. You're just organizing emotional exhibits for the prosecution. And listen, sometimes parents genuinely cause harm. Some people absolutely needed distance, boundaries, or even to be cut off entirely. But I also think some people get emotionally trapped in blame because blame protects you from grief. Because once you stop making your parents the villain, you often have to face something sadder. They were flawed. They were limited. They were human. Your parents were emotionally shaped by things long before you existed. And honestly, that realization can hurt more than anger sometimes. One thing that shifted my perspective was realizing that my parents did not appear on this earth as fully formed adults. They had childhoods too, which sounds obvious, but I don't think we think about our parents that way for a long time. We think of them as mom and dad, authority figures, the people who were supposed to know what they were doing. Then, one day, you realize, oh, they were just people trying to operate with whatever emotional tools they inherited. And honestly, that realization explains a lot. Because when I started looking at my own parents honestly, I could suddenly see emotional patterns that they inherited from their parents. Patterns that were passed down through the generations. Overworking, emotional avoidance, people pleasing, hyper independence, anxiety around money, difficulty resting, needing achievement to feel valuable. And what's interesting is that many families do not consciously pass these things down through conversations. They pass them through modeling. Kids absorb emotional behavior like little sponges. As a kid, you watched how stress gets handled, how conflicts get resolved, how emotions get handled. You watched whether people rested or just collapsed from exhaustion periodically and called that balance. And eventually, those emotional patterns started feeling normal. That's why I think healing requires understanding. Because if you only stay in blame, you never actually see the full system. You only see the hurt. And while the hurt still matters, understanding the system is what helps you change it. This is exactly the kind of stuff I write about in my Substack, High Achiever Off Duty. A lot of my work is about helping high achieving women understand the emotional patterns underneath overworking, burnout, overfunctioning, and nervous system exhaustion. Because many of us were praised our entire lives for coping mechanisms that are now exhausting us. So if this conversation is resonating with you, you can join by clicking the little link down below. I think one of the hardest transitions in healing is realizing your wounds may not be your fault, but your healing is still your responsibility. And I know that statement can annoy people sometimes, because when you first realize how deeply your childhood affected you, it can feel unfair that you now have to fix it. And honestly, it is unfair. But healing is not really about fairness. It's about freedom. Because eventually you reach a point where you realize,
I can't keep handing my parents control over my life forever.
and this is where I think some people accidentally stay emotionally stuck. Their entire identity becomes organized around what happened to them. Every conversation goes back to their parents. Every problem goes back to childhood. Every emotional reaction becomes proof that they are damaged. And again, understanding childhood matters deeply. But healing also requires slowly building an identity beyond your wounds. Because you are not just the things that happen to you. You are also the choices you make now. And honestly, I think this part is scary because once you stop blaming everyone else, you finally have to face yourself and start asking, okay, what patterns do I want to keep carrying? What emotional rules do I want to change? What kind of person do I actually want to become? I think this is where I think most people accidentally stay stuck. Their entire identity becomes organizing around what happened to them. Every conversation goes back to their parents. Every problem goes back to childhood. Every emotional reaction becomes proof that they are damaged. And again, understanding childhood matters deeply. But healing also requires slowly building an identity beyond your wounds. Because you are not just the things that happen to you, you are also the choices you make now. And honestly, I think this part is scary. Because once you stop blaming everybody else, you finally have to face yourself and start asking, okay, what patterns do I want to keep carrying? And what patterns do I want to challenge? And what kind of person do I actually want to become? And this part is much harder than blame, because blame keeps you focused outward, but healing turns your focus inward. So I want to give you an exercise that helped me get out of blame and into understanding. So get out a notebook, not your phone. Your phone is a portal to distractions and unnecessary information. Get a notebook and then divide the page into 3 sections. The first section is, what did my parents teach me emotionally? Not what they said, what they modeled. Did they teach you that rest was laziness? That emotions were inconvenient? That achievement made you valuable? That love meant self-sacrifice? That conflict should be avoided at all costs? Then, in the second section, write, how are these patterns showing up in my life today? Be brutally honest. Do you overwork, avoid conflict, struggle to rest, feel guilty for having needs, feel responsible for everybody? Then, in the final section, this is, what do I want to keep and what do I want to change? Because healing is not about becoming anti-parent. It's about being conscious. It's about deciding intentionally who you want to become instead of unconsciously repeating inherited patterns. I think that's one of the real markers of adulthood. Not blaming your parents forever and not pretending they had no effect on you, but understanding them clearly enough that you can finally choose differently. I think one of the biggest shifts in my own healing journey happened when I stopped asking whose fault this is and started asking, where did this come from? And what do I do with it now? Because blame kept me emotionally stuck in the past. Understanding helped me move forward. And honestly, I still have moments where I catch myself wanting simple answers. I still sometimes want people to be either fully good or fully bad, because complexity is exhausting. But most families are complicated. Most parents are complicated. Most people are carrying emotional patterns they never consciously chose. And I think healing is learning how to see that clearly without losing compassion for yourself in the process. All right. I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.